recording. Okay, let me start again. Sorry. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beyond the Ice Part 2. I'm Jessie Brandt, Director of Programs and Operations for the Global Wellness Summit and Institute. I'm so glad you could join us today. We're excited to continue exploring the art and science of contrast therapy with you all. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. We encourage you to turn on your camera and select gallery view to see everyone. Please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. I will mute everyone shortly. We encourage you to ask questions, but we would like to hold them until the end if possible. We will call on you when you raise your hand. We have more time for audience interaction today, so don't hold back. This is your chance to get insights directly from our experts. I'd like to start by introducing our panel. Don Gender, CEO of Design for Leisure, Lasse Eriksson, internationally recognized sauna expert, and Dr. Marcus Koplin, ND, naturopathic doctor and thermal bathing specialist. Moderating today's discussion will be Cassandra Kavanagh, Vice Chair of the GWI Hydrothermal Initiative. With that, I turn it over to Cassandra to kick things off.
Thanks, Jessie. It's so great to have you here today with us. Thanks a lot for helping us with our tech, struggles. Hi, guys. It's great to have you all back for part 2 of the Beyond the Ice series. We're really loving the conversations we've been having with you all, and we want to say that you should look forward to more webinars from our initiative in the future. We look forward to sharing more discussions around hydrothermal bathing. So in our last session, we broke down the basics of contrast therapy. We talked a lot about how it's not about pushing yourselves to extremes of hot and cold, despite perhaps what social media would have us believe. Don put forth a kind of crucial question. How can we make the shift from bragging rights to a lifelong practice? Because that's where the benefits of hydrothermal really lay. The real magic doesn't really happen in the extremities. It happens in the spaces in between when we pause to rest and let our bodies and minds integrate the entire experience. So we talked about how we can help folks move away from thinking in extremes to more personal and mindful practices that bring in that moment of stillness where the benefits of thermal bathing can really sink in. Marcus reminded us of something really important, that places like in the US and the UK are really at the start of building their own bathing cultures, unlike the centuries-old practices that you'll find in other countries and cultures. We just haven't really had that, so we're sort of fresh. So I think it's really up to us, the industry and big believers in the benefits of hydrothermal bathing, to help people and more people and be more exclusive, to help them to ease into these experiences in a way that feels safe and inviting. One of the things we touched on is that thoughtful design can really help with that, like the inclusion of nature, relaxation spaces, and a full array of thermal experiences, including gentler heat and cold. It can really make all the difference in turning first-timers into lifelong fans of hydrothermal bathing, and that's really what we want. So today we're here to continue the conversation of how to make these journeys more welcoming and transformative for everyone. I can't wait to hear what you, the audience, has to say and what our panelists has to say. So let's get started. But before we jump into what is going to be an interactive conversation, as Jessie said, we'd love to see you guys on camera and be able to interact with our experts here. But before we get into that, we'd love to invite each of the panelists, starting with Don, to share some of their takeaways from our part 1 session. Don, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Cassandra. You know I always forget. Yes, look, I think that we can't put enough emphasis on the fact that thermal bathing contrast therapy. It's not a competitive sport. This is something we do for enjoyment and pleasure and our personal wellness. But we don't have to go through a huge pain, and it's not an endurance test. This is something that we, as you've said already, this is something that we want to encourage people to embrace as part of a lifestyle, an ongoing, lifelong practice, to make their lives better, to make their health better. We're not looking at for people making 30-second TikTok videos and never ever using one of our types of bathing facilities ever again. And I think also the important side of this is to examine that within the general spa, wellness center, bathhouse, whatever name is over the door of the facility where individuals may go to practice thermotherapy or thermal bathing. The fact is that they will invariably have more than one way to get hot or more than one way to get cold. And similarly, that even if there were only one way to get hot, and you don't have to stay in there in as long as the guy who's there every week, 3 times a week, and sitting on the top bench. You could sit on the lower bench and sit there longer. There are plenty of ways to do this because it's all about listening to your body and doing what is right for you. Marcus, on this, is this, I can't emphasize this, how important this is, that we get away from this competitive image that people are beginning to give to this this therapy.
Yeah, Don, I couldn't, I very much agree with you around this idea around de-emphasizing competition and intensity. And I have a few points that I'll touch on that, but I definitely agree with that point of view that you're taking there.
So, hey, Lasse, would you like to give us some thoughts from last session as well? And don't forget to unmute. Yeah.
Wonderful to see everyone, and thank you, Don and Marcus and Cassandra for making this happen again. Just to kind of follow up on that one, Don, I remember many years ago when we had these sauna sessions and people were coming into all the ceremonies and they were all very touched with their sympathetic nervous system, because every time we had a sauna session, they came and asked, how hot is it and how long does it last? And when people start to understand that it's your choice, you can leave whenever you want, and you can actually sit wherever you want as well. So you can sit on the top, it's 80 degrees Celsius, and in the bottom it's 40 degrees Celsius. You can even sit on the floor. I have people lying down on the floor with the fresh air inside the sauna room. The key is actually to go in and surrender to the process. And that's where the magic happens. So when people start to understand that it's actually my choice and not in a competitive way, I have to sit there, or being with other, which has been pushed before. I don't know why it happened some years ago. It was competitive. I remember we had even a world championships in sauna where people were trying to fight to sit to the end, and actually there was one guy died on that process, and still it haunts us in our industry in sauna. It haunts us these time, but I have to sit there for a long time. But finally it starts to happen that people can release that. So that's why from the last session, I kind of, what sticks with me is the thing that what Marcus said at that point, is that we want people to do this on a regular basis, because that's where the science comes in. When you actually do it on a regular basis, we don't have much science on just what happened today. or tomorrow, but we want to see the long-term effects. And that's not in doing super extreme things. I don't like to go into 170 degrees Karafuro hardcore sauna or sitting in a 0 degrees water for 10 minutes to fight myself through. I want to do something every day. And that's where this session comes in, that maybe a cold shower, a fresh shower in the morning can actually make you do this more easily. Having a fresh air, having an electric sauna to heat you up. You know, we like wood-fired saunas, but it takes more time and effort to actually make it happen. So there are easier way to do this every day, every week, or actually quite often. And that's kind of the take on our chat here, which I find important.
Great, thank you. Marcus, I think, can you share some of your thoughts from our last session?
Yeah, sure. And thanks to Don and Lasse for going first. It always gives me a little bit more to think about and work with. And I agree with all the points that were brought up. But for me, since our last session, what I spent a lot of time meditating about was, you know, the actual experiences that I've had as someone who engages with cold therapy fairly regularly. Where have been kind of maybe the most impactful moments? Because we talked a lot last time about design and how we can kind of create a culture of space and intentionality to invite people into practice more organically, you know, less cerebrally, less through the mind and through a protocol, but rather encourage kind of a more ritualized or practice approach. And I agree and reemphasize that, you know, for me, the real benefit is in continual practice, whether with all of its variations and imperfections, the ongoing, truly the practice of something like cold water bathing is where I think the real, you know, the meat of the issue is. And so I wanted to touch on this idea of competition, because I do think that we have gone into this extreme place where you know, it is about kind of outdoing and maybe even competing most importantly with ourselves to prove to ourselves that we're stronger than we believe. Well, I think back to maybe my first touch point on the culture of cold water bathing was the Polar Bear Club. I mean, I think before I ever even knew that cold water bathing was something that was therapeutic, I knew about the Polar Bear Club, where people would strip down in winter and jump into an icy lake together. And they were always so elated, and there was so much fun included in that practice, even though it was, you know, it was exhilarating, and it was, I don't know, not necessarily competitive, but cooperative, and I think that there was something really special about that. So that got me thinking about other cold experiences I've had where it's not just been me and the cold water against the world, even though those can be quite profound and meditative. I do think about the experiences in which I've been in a cold swim, cold immersion with other people. And perhaps my first and favorite memory of this was years ago in Hungary, in the city of Budapest, at the Széchenyi baths. And they have a beautiful, very cold plunge pool right outside of their sauna, and it can maybe fit 15 people easily. And there were these old Hungarian men who were just sort of in the corner, just sort of very, very zen and just sitting there. And I remember as I was going into the cold water at this time, many years ago, I was not that well practiced in it. So it was still much more of a difficulty to stay into the cold water. But I saw these people and I realized that there was maybe a group experience that I could participate in, and it encouraged me. I didn't push myself. I allowed myself, you know, and this is something when I teach cold water bathing, when I'm in the water with somebody, I always remind them it's important to move beyond the resistance. The resistance of the cold is where we feel the discomfort, but relaxing into that and allowing that discomfort, allowing that, that's actually what builds the resiliency, because we're deciding consciously how we want to show up to discomfort. And the more we can allow and release, the more that kind of entrains the body in that experience. And I think having that as a group practice has another element to this, which is the power of community, the power of being witnessed. And there's some very interesting neuroscience around what happens when I do something and I'm being witnessed in it, and how that can create a different type of effect. And so I think at the hot springs where I work, we do guided cold plunge group plunges every day. And I think about when I'm either leading one of those plunges, or when I watch some of the other wellness instructors at our facilities lead them, the ability for people to go beyond what they thought was possible because of the container of the community is so important. And so these are some of the thoughts that I've been sitting with as we think about, as Cassandra said, how we want to continue to build a culture of therapeutic bathing, specifically in North America, where I'm based, but in the world. How do we want to advance the culture of cold water bathing and hydrothermal therapies in general? And so, yeah, those are where my thoughts have been focused.
Thank you. Those are fantastic. And, bringing the community and the witnessing concept into this is great. I know we all on the panel have had a bunch of incredible positive experiences in social communal bathing. And it makes everything much more inviting as well. So that's another way to introduce folks to the beauty of hydrothermal bathing. I mean, quickly, I'll mention the fact that we recently had a sauna AUFGS event in the US. And just that bonding that you get while all being together in the heat and then going for the cold together, it's something you can't match, and it's really hard to explain until you've done it. But at any rate, so what we want to do in this session is really open up the conversation. And as I said, if I could see some faces, that would be great. We had a question come in earlier from Chris Devlin. If Chris is here, from Alameda's Cooperative Hot Springs, say hi, please, if you're here. He asked, and I believe Chris, what do you think is more important? The temperatures of the, Marcus, this is for you, because you obviously can answer this easily, and I think I know the answer, but what is more important? The temperatures of a cold bath, the temperature itself, or the difference between the hot and the cold?
Interesting. Well, I have to make an admission, which is that Chris Devlin might be a plant, because he's a friend of mine. So anyway, look, the real answer, of course, is never going to be simple. And this is maybe one of the most frustrating things that I have about me, is that I never give a simple answer when a more complicated true answer suffices. And this is a case of that, where it's not just the one or the other. In fact, both things can be important, and I'll explain real quickly. Scientifically speaking, cold water, basically is classified as water underneath 15 degrees Celsius, I think it is. And that means that it's a stimulus to the body, a healthy stressor to the body that upregulates the body's resistance and surveillance of how it responds to stress. And so the more extreme you go into the cold, as you go from 15 to 10 to 5 to 0 to negative, I'm speaking in Celsius, the more intense that stress is on the body, and the more the body has to respond to that stress. And so from that point of view, there is no one temperature that is ideal, because that intensity of stress needs to be matched to each individual person. And that could change not only from person to person, but within the same person from day to day, based on other factors like how well you slept, if you have psychological stresses going on in your life, what your nutritional status is like, if you've been injured. All of these things are going to affect your stress resiliency and how you respond to a cold water stress. And so I tend to advocate for less extreme cold water temperatures for the general population and for people who are in a regular practice. The only time that I think truly extreme cold temperatures are warranted are within people who are very well adapted to cold water bathing, because they do it all the time and they have, a high level of resiliency because of that. Now, to the other part of the question about contrasting, that is also important, but we have to recognize that heat, also a form of healthy stress, has a different, let's say, parameter of responses that it evokes within the body. So the cold does one thing, the heat does another. And there are things that happen, we've talked about this, I'm sure most people here know, the metabolic effects of cold water, the conversion from white adipose tissue into brown adipose tissue, which is more metabolically active, more anti-inflammatory, more hormonally balancing. Heat, upregulates all these genetic pathways of hormesis, which are, again, healthy stress responses. The things like the NRF2 pathways and the heat shock protein upregulations that all work to increase the resiliency of the body. So you're activating two different systems by hot stress and cold stress, and combining them, of course, you get a much more full spectrum response. And I'll just say one last point, which is we talk a lot about the resiliency and the hormetics and the metabolic effects, but strictly speaking, from a thermal circulatory perspective, I think there's a lot of power in the concept of heat expands, cold contracts. And we create this microcirculatory pump throughout the body by expanding with heat and contracting with cold. And I'm a physician, and I treat people with really chronic and complex conditions, and sick people. That heat might be slightly warmer than body temperature, and that cold might be 60 degrees Celsius. We're not talking extremes, but still you're taking the body and slowly exposing it to the edges of its circulatory capacity, as well as its hormetic stress response capacity. And that pumping action, I think, is something that really cannot be overlooked in how deeply acting that is for a health response in the body. That ability to improve the distribution of blood and the penetration of freshly oxygenated blood into the tissues. It's really kind of one of the most foundational ways that I've found to rebuild health and maintain health and resiliency and longevity in people. So I hope that gets at the question.
Wow, well, that was a deep answer, but what it shows is how the benefits are there and proven and seen by the medical community. But what's so great about hydrothermal bathing is that we've historically done this practice, and those are the benefits we've been reaping. I say we, maybe not as much in the US, but the cultures abroad that have embraced it. And that's kind of, I think, one of the fascinations with this wellness practice is the fact that it's something we enjoy so thoroughly, and can access easily, and the more we bring it into our everyday practice, the more benefits, like what Marcus is talking about, we get. Lasse, did you want to add to that, or yeah?
Yeah, because that's why I love this conversation, because I'm the guy who practices inside the sauna room. That's my life, and it resonates. I love what you say here, Marcus, because for us, when we do our practice in the sauna or smoke sauna or whatever we do, is that we have the fire and the heat. It opens you and it cracks your shell. So you open up and start to connect with the ancestors or the spirits or whatever you do through the low loop. While when we do the contrast, it brings the spirit back into the body. So we go into the cold, so we are opening up and connecting with our ancestors and working with the spirits in heat. And then the cold actually does that. It brings us the contrast back to our spirit to be inside, rather than the spirit working outside. So it's interesting to hear kind of from a medical point of view, and then we come on our side and thinking, well, it's actually, you make good sense, because from another way of saying it, it fits, and it's very much true in how we see our way of working with spirits, which is a different way to think, even if that's a little bit not much science in it, but still.
I tend to think that these are just different language groupings for speaking about the same phenomenon, Yeah. But beautiful, beautiful.
So I'm seeing some questions in the chat, and I see Jonathan, you've asked a question. You want to unmute yourself and give us a go for it?
Sure. This is wonderful. I feel like I'm in a community of saunas right now. Yeah, I was wondering if you would discern the meaning of sweat, soak, and plunge. These are different activities. But in terms of, I think, Marcus, what you're saying here, what strikes me is that we're dealing with a really, the reflex arc. There was an old Austrian physician, Wintersnitz, during the 19th century, that presented this whole thing of the reflex arc and how that responds to the temperature. So it's temperature and time, and what is the arc of that, and how that's going termed in the sense of rhythmically. But I think you really nailed it in terms of the physiology of all this. But I came up with 7 R's. I like to play with R's. So it has to do with a ritual, rhythmically regulating the reflex in order to gain resilience and rebuild. So somewhere in there are 7 R's. But anyway, I think you're right onto something. And I really like the way that you're blending both the science and the spirituality. I think that is really key here, because and how to look at this as ritual, rhythmic. And it is, and again, the movement from moving from contest to community. I think that's really key. But thank you all.
Thank you.
I think Paul, what you've got there is that last comment you made, and something that Marcus mentioned earlier on about the Polar Bear Club, and actually, Marcus, you really, what you were describing there is social wellness, and this is one thing that is. And it's a relatively new term, and actually we've been using it more amongst ourselves, because we were finding that bathhouses were being described more and more, but with Bathhouse also being a brand of an operator, and we were looking for something that was a bit more generic and a bit more broad spectrum. And social wellness clubs is what we hit upon here, and I think this is something fantastic, because yes, it's social, and that's great, because it's social away from nightclubs and social away from bars and diversification of one's social life. But then we've got the wellness bit, and it's this whole sort of lifestyle that we can see beginning to emerge, and a new lifestyle. and it's really quite exciting to, you know, having spent sort of, you know, over 3 decades in this industry, to suddenly see it, you know, growing on a massively upward trajectory of popularity. And I think that the other thing that we need to sort of, you know, everybody to realize here is that, you know, there are lots of ways of getting warm and lots of ways of getting cold. And this is part of the social activity, that you can do things that apply and appeal to everybody. So it's not just, you know, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. You've got to go in the hottest sauna. You've got to go in the coldest pool. You haven't got to do that. You know, you can use a cold foot bath. You can use a simple shower. You can use, then you can have, you know, the more elaborate, the snow showers, the snow rooms, the cold rooms. But these are all different gradations of getting cold. The same way as the hammam, the steam room, the sauna are different gradations, you know, and indeed the hot tub even, are different gradations of ways of getting hot. And I think this is, you know, I think we're really onto something here with the social element and wellness being such an amazing byproduct, that we have the science to support it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Don. And also, I'm looking at the chat and seeing something that applies to you from Lynn Curry. Lynn, can you turn on your camera or your microphone and ask that question to Don?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is great, you guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. The depth of the cold plunge. I actually got a little argument with a client who insisted it had to be deep. And I said, no, so, I mean, I just want to hear your official take on that.
Okay. Well, hi, Lynn. Good to see you.
Hi, Don.
Yeah. Look, the cold plunge depth is an age-old one, and it very much depends on which country you're operating in as well. I mean, yeah, in lots of countries, and I'm not just talking about North America now. Lots of countries will have a code that states that if your water depth is in excess of 4 feet or 1.2 meters, you need a lifeguard on duty. Now, you know, that often dictates an investor's a decision, you know, saying, well, yeah, I'd love to have a deeper cold plunge, but I'm terribly sorry, you know, I'm not going to pay a lifeguard to be there every opening hour. And so we're going to stick with 4 feet or 1.2 meters. But of course, you know, and I think the other side of a cold plunge is very much how big it is. Because, you know, ultimately, you know, if you're going to get into a cold plunge and you're going to, you know, go for full immersion, then it's got to be of a size, you know, that allows you to do that. Well, if you're talking about a single, almost like these little spiral snail, you know, in plan little Nautilus type snail shaped cold plunges, then, you know, with one person can get in, well, you know, it's quite hard to crunch down and go for total immersion if this whole thing is only 3 foot diameter. So, you know, maybe you need to go for a 5 foot deep pool and to hell with the code. But you know, in general, that, you know, the bigger the pool, the easier it is for somebody to go for total immersion, because they don't have to scrunch down. They can sort of almost lay flat and, you know, go completely under the water. So it's not really you know, there's no real rule about it. One thing I will always say with cold plunges is that the larger the better, because you can get more people in there. Individual pools are incredibly expensive to maintain. You've got a huge amount of bather to a very small amount of volume of water. And that therein lies a lot of health management issues as well. And really balancing that water chemistry is incredibly difficult. And finally, on that subject, when you're talking about water chemistry and health and hygiene and safety, is do not rely on minimum codes set by departments of health, you know, anywhere, because you need to design that pool for the function. And that pool is going to be in a very busy spa where you will have, you know, 60, 70 people coming out of a sauna. And even though you tell them to shower, they won't shower and they'll go straight into that pool. Then you've got to sort that water chemistry out. There's not a code in the world that will tell you a turnover rate that actually suits that bathing practice in your pool.
Ooh, I love that topic as well.
That's a great point.
Could I add something to that?
Yes.
Because next time I'm going to design a pool, a kind of cold water pool, because I've been working quite many years now with the world champion in freediving. His name is Jesper Stekman, and we do a lot of meditations in water, both tempered, hot and cold. So to design this one, to actually, when you're going to do meditations in it, you need kind of some possible grounding. Meaning, so when we're going to design this, we were actually going to have where you can put your hands a bit underneath, where you can actually lean them into something, where you can hold them slightly relaxed, because to immerse yourself in cold water with your face is quite intense. But you need a possibility to push. So when you're going to go up again, so you don't lie there and fly around. So we figure out that it's nice when you design it that you have possibility to push yourself slowly up. So you can go slowly up and down, so you don't use too much energy or stress to kind of survive down there. So just my personal point of view for cold pools, make them safe and comfortable to be in, rather than trying to, you know, to have it to the most extreme again. So you feel grounded and safe, and you can actually do meditations down there, which is just a little tip.
Yeah.
From Jesper.
I'll just add one last little point to this, which is that, you know, like we're talking about with depth, we talk about hydrostatic pressure, and the deeper you go, the more pressure there is. I mean, this is the whole kind of science of, you know, underwater diving, etc. But the reality is, as long as somebody can get immersed up to the neck, you're going to get the distribution of hydrostatic pressure effectively enough for a good response from that point of view. Where, you know, the extra couple feet, whether they're extended or crouched, yes, it might make a little bit of difference in millimeters of pressure applied to the deep of the feet, but I don't think that you're going to have it be reasonably different. So I think you're fine at the 4-foot depth, but I agree with Don's and Lasse's points on size and comfort. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I have another kind of design question that comes from Walker, but Walker is quite technical. And the only person I think that would be that could answer this is probably Don, although I'm not even sure how to put it to him. So do you want to ask that question, Walker?
I've read it. Yeah, and yeah, thank you, really, Cassandra. That's really kind of you to dump that one on me. Walker, thank you. Look, I can assure you that it's not just in America that you have 2 bench saunas without the various sort of, you know, heat degradation between the benches, but in actual fact, the actual temperature of the sauna is not as critical as people would like to say. Okay, you know, anything above 770 Celsius, which I think is 160 Fahrenheit. I mean that's a sauna, and you know, the hotter you make that sauna, then, you know, yes, the faster you will sweat, but also the higher you sit up in that sauna, the faster you will sweat. But I don't think you need to suddenly start saying, oh, well, you know, every sauna that doesn't give you enough of a heat, you know, or a core temperature, body temperature increase is a bad sauna, or that the time I'm not a great advocate of anything to do with time prescriptions when it comes to thermal bathing, because every body is different, and everybody's resistance is different, and people who practice sauna bathing, you know, can take higher temperatures for longer than people who don't, and it just, you know, a state of mind a lot of the time. But you know, we always advocate to people to listen to your body. And the same way as we listen to our body when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, when we're too hot, when we're walking down the street, when we're too cold, when we're walking down the street. And sometimes I think that people are asking all these questions. How long should I stay in the sauna? How long should I stay in the sauna and steam room, hot tub, cold plunge, cold shower, as long as you are comfortable and when your body tells you that to leave whatever thermotherapy you're using at the time. So I don't think that this is too much of something to get concerned about as to what is on offer in America compared to what is often advocated or built and offered in Europe. And I think that we are seeing a massive increase in sauna interest and sauna bathing, and the sauna science and the sauna design is getting better in the United States all of the time. So that's, it might not be a very specific answer, but that is my answer.
So I was thinking more from a physiological standpoint. So with our body, if, you know, like in the measurements we've done so far, an American gym sauna, you get about 0.6 degrees Celsius core body before you have to leave the sauna. That's about as long as you can stay in, versus in a sauna in Finland or Germany or Austria, for instance, where you can get about a 1.8 degree, you know, about 3 times as much of a core body temp. And, you know, I know for me, it makes a huge difference in the cold plunge that it's certainly much more enjoyable to cold plunge after the greater core body temp increase than after the minimal increase. So there's the comfort standpoint. But there's also, and this is, you know, getting into health wellness benefits can get kind of controversial sometimes, except maybe for this group. The health wellness benefits seem to come from achieving a certain core body temp and then achieving it on the other side with contrast therapy on the cold side. And so that's what, you know, does that make a difference, or is it, you know, as you're saying, maybe not that big of a deal?
I feel like this is a Marcus question, and it isn't, you're sort of taking that extreme, and we are talking about the fact that you can benefit from it not being quite as
well,
extreme.
actually, I'm not thinking about it from an extreme standpoint, because I'm not, I typically sauna at 85 to 90 degree Celsius sauna, but very even temperature and steam stratification. In cold plunge, I'm more in like the 18 to 24 range. So I'm not big, you know. I know a lot of people aim for below 10, which I will do, but I don't necessarily enjoy it. That's cold.
Yeah, I think I can get at your question, Walker, and maybe even wrap a couple of the other questions I've been seeing in the chat into my response, because what we're talking about a couple things. We can't just consider temperature. We also have to consider humidity. And this speaks a little bit to the cryotherapy question on the other extreme. You know, why is it that you can go into cryotherapy at negative temperatures, negative Fahrenheit temperatures with cold air, but 40 degrees Fahrenheit of cold water feels excruciating in comparison? Why is it that you can sit in a hot, dry room at 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can stay there for 20 minutes, but 2 minutes in 112 degrees feels excruciating? 112 degree water feels excruciating. Well, it's because water itself, we're hydrothermal, so heat and water, that's the name of this initiative. Water is a very efficient transmitter of heat energy, both into the body and out of the body based on thermodynamics. So the humidity of a hot room in the context of your question, Walker, will actually make a difference with how much thermal energy is being transferred into the body. Now, and I'll also wrap in this other question about infrared saunas. Infrared saunas tend to be drier and tend to be lower temperature. And there's a big question, which is the better sauna? Well, Lasse, I'll let you speak for yourself on this, but I would imagine that, you know, the ritual of the wood fire traditional sauna really it enlivens something in the soul that maybe the infrared doesn't do. But you know, if the goal is to have a long session of sweating, the lower temperature that still gets you sweating, you're going to be able to endure that for a longer period of time. And so for more of a detoxification from purely from the amount of sweat leaving the body, maybe an infrared at a lower temperature is better. But if you're looking for that metabolic adaptation, those cardiovascular hormetic effects, the higher heat stress intensity is going to be that you'd get from maybe a traditional sauna is going to be more effective. So again, it depends on what your goal is. Of course, then if the goal is a community ritual, that's a whole other host of questions. But again, there is no necessarily a better option in terms of the amount of heat that is transferred in the core temperature, but Walker, I think you hit on something interesting sort of intuitively, which is you say you feel better when you go from the high heat to the cold. Remember, like I said, those high heat moments, they're going to activate a lot of these pathways within the body. Also, your blood is up in your skin. All the capillary beds in the skin are dilated to try and keep your core temperature from overheating. And then so you have all this blood that's out in the skin that's all these activated pathways, all this oxygen, leaving hemoglobin and entering into free circulation. And then you go into the cold water and that cold pump, remember, heat expands, cold constricts. That cold pump pushes all that blood into your vital organs, through your liver, into your lungs, your kidneys, your intestines. And so all that oxygen-rich, metabolically active blood is now in your organs. And so yes, I could understand why you would feel that bigger effect with more high heat. But again, that is highly individualistic, and you still get a benefit even without the extremes. So, you know, again, I wish I had the easy answer, but hopefully I touched on a few things there.
But
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that one, there was a lot of points here. First of all, just so people know, infra radiation also comes from a regular sauna oven. It's not kind of different things, these things. It also comes from a regular oven. So you actually get the spiritual connection and work with the sauna as a, you know, as an entity. But actually it also has infrared radiation through the sauna oven, just so people know. So it's not that big a difference in that part. You struck something here, Marcus, because Jari Laukkanen, some of you probably know, he had a study, was over 20 years, where most of his study was the cardiovascular study. And that was a 20-minute session in a sauna, where they had the process of 20 minutes as a process for 2,500 people, I think it was, where it had quite substantial results, even if it wasn't a sauna study, it was more of a cardiovascular one. But still it had that if you did sauna 4 times or more per week, you had, you know, over, I don't remember fully, 55% less chance to have mortality rate of cardiovascular death and something like that. The same was in Alzheimer's and elderly diseases. So the point you make here, Marcus, is time. We come back to this. The essence is very often time, because if you're inside this hot room for a very substantial amount of time, or do you kind of slowly adapt? Because you need to adapt, you need to start the sweating process to cool down, you need to get your body actually going, like we work with athletics. You need to warm up for 50, 60 minutes before you can sprint 100 meters. Otherwise, you tear your muscles up. You're not ready for it. You need to prepare yourself for the process. And that is why you should start slowly with adaptations to slow heat and slow contrast in cold. you do fresh air, you do softer heat, you build yourself resilience through the thing. So very often when we do sauna process, we very often start low, around 60, 70 degrees Celsius. And we moisture the walls so it's easier for you to breathe. So it connects to your lungs much easier than going into a 90, 100 degrees Celsius sauna where it's very hard contrast. And then you can increase the steam and you increase the temperature higher. And I totally agree with you, Walker. When I'm finished with after 2 hours or 3 hours sauna, I want the hard contrast, you know, because then you're prepared for, you build a high heat resilience, and then you build then also that low cold resilience as well, because you want it. The challenge is very often that people have a tendency to go into a 10-minute sauna session and they pour very hot, they steam too hard, they're not ready for that, and then the stress is too hard for them and they're not prepared for that. So I would kind of, just to follow up on what Marcus said here, the time I would say is the key for a good contrast when you go deep hard and deep cold and very hot. Because otherwise they will not be able to stand in there for much long time. And maybe that's what makes them afraid too, that say, I don't like sauna. It's because they have come into this very dry, very 90, 100 degrees one, and it's kind of starting to steam immediately before you even connect, before you even know the lulu of the room. You don't feel the spiritual power of the room. You're just there for a physical exercise. Then it's very hard. So I would say adaptation is an essence into this process, also with core heat. It's not going super fast. You need to take it over a long time. And then it's there. I don't know if that can help, but.
Thanks, Lasse. And something else has come up in the chat, which I think is really relevant to talk about. Kaylin asked, in terms of the cycle that you do your contrast bathing on, hot and cold, what do you end in? And as Don pointed out in the chat, you know, rest. So Don, I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about that very important component of the hydrobathing cycle, rest, and how it's important to design that ability into your cycle, whether it's, you know, as you said, at a spa, at a gym, wherever you are. The rest part is incredibly important.
Well, yeah, we as designers, we spend a lot of time talking to investors, and you know, investors are very sort of, you know, oh no, I want, you know, can't we get fit in an extra thing here, an extra thing there? Can we put an extra sauna here, an extra steam room here? And trying to explain, you know, to investors that, you know, this whole cycle of thermotherapy, you know, is hot, cold, rest, repeat, and ideally in 3 cycles. Now, you know, the fact is that if you haven't got as much space to rest as you have to get hot or to get cold, then ultimately people are not going to be able to enjoy that cycle. And you know, saying to investors, oh, well, no, we need more relaxation space. We need more space for people to do nothing. We need more space for people to sit and rest and contemplate. And often we get pushback from people like that, even though that's the cheapest space for them to create. We'll get pushback because they feel, oh, no, we want more toys, we want more things for people to do, and they're missing this incredibly important element of rest. You know, it's not the one and done, you know, in the sauna out again. It is a cycle, and that cycle needs equal consideration, equal space, and otherwise you can't do it, and you don't enjoy it, you don't get the health benefits from it. And ultimately, if you're running a business relying on repeat customers, you don't get any repeat customers because they say, oh, well, it was okay, but I couldn't find anywhere to sit down and rest, you know, so I went. And that's a, you know, criminal way to treat your investment, that then you create something people don't like.
I mean, isn't that for those of us who have children, you know, we go to amusement parks. What do we miss? a place to rest, right? We get really tired of, and this is amusement park in a way for adults. When you go to a spa or a sauna, you go and you get, and you meet people, you connect, the dopamine releases, you become happy, you start to talk with people, you become very energized and all these things, but you need those space to actually lean back, be by yourself and rest after this session. So you're so right, Don. We miss that a lot around, and the best ones, they do have a good resting facilities.
I'm going to just add on real quick my little 2 cents, because I agree emphatically with Don and Lasse on these topics, and rest being something that really rest and integration, you know. And Lasse, I love what you said before about heat. It connects to the universal spirit, cold to the self. And then, you know, rest, I would say, is that third place of integration. How are you going to then, you know, find that kind of balance point between those two poles as you walk out into the world? I want to touch on one real quick point that Don said, you know, ideally we should be doing this 3 times, right? Well, I agree with that. And typically that is what I recommend also. The only, and typically I would say if you end your contrast cycle on cold and then you go into that rest integration phase, that's what the ideal situation would be. However, if the cold stimulus, this is my one complicated answer because that's what I'm doing today. If the cold stimulus is too intense, if it overwhelmed the ability of the body to rewarm itself, it actually is a benefit to use external heat to bring the body back into that integration point. And so maybe something to consider about restful places as well is, you know, are there varieties of almost temperatures from neutral to slightly warm so people could kind of find their way back. But doing that cycle over 3 rounds, you know, you go back into the hot and you rewarm. And each time you do it, it teaches your body what it's capable of, so that by the 3rd round, your body is much more capable of rewarming itself intrinsically than it was had you just ended on the 1st round. So I hope that gives some kind of context for why we do the things that we do.
Yes, and you also touch on the notion of rest can have some gentle warming. I mean, obviously we talk about in design, you know, heated loungers, which are beautiful to lay on, or gentler warming rooms, which you'll have in various spas, things that make that more comfortable. But I'm going to have to wrap this up. This has been a fantastic conversation. One of the things I know we hit a little bit on the infrared discussion, the differences between the experiences of the heat and infrared versus the sauna. That's one of the topics that we look forward to exploring in a future webinar, just around general sauna, different types of saunas that are out there. And we'd love to explore that with you guys as well. So I want to thank you all for joining us and thank our panelists, Don, Lasse, and Marcus. You've been very insightful. We really appreciate it. And Jesse, thank you for your help. Big time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Cassandra. And yes, we're sharing the QR code that links to the Hydrothermal Initiative's microsite, so you can find more information on there, also information about the next webinar.
Yes, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.